Hello, welcome to, I think it's the fifth video in this series for Windows Server 2016. Today we'll talk about DNS Basics. So far in our series of labs, we've created a domain with 2 DCs. We've installed DHCP on one of them, and we have a Windows 7 PC just to test features and help explain things. In this video, I'll show how DNS got there in our current environment, our lab, how to install it manually, and then we'll explore the management console and talk about basics, how to manage more than one DC, and we'll look at some of the advanced view features like DNS cache, and then we'll also talk about forward and reverse lookup and zones. And we'll also see how those DNS records get copied over to the other DC. So we'll jump in here and get started. I'll get logged in and come. Okay, so we've got the 2 machines here, Windows 7 in the background and a domain controller here. We can see that the roles are installed, directory services for Active Directory and DHCP and DNS. So first off is, how does DNS get there in our environment? Well, when we installed the Active Directory services and promoted it to a domain controller, in those steps there was a recommendation or a requirement to install DNS, and that's how it got there. If your Windows Server 2016 server doesn't have the role right now, you can click on Add Roles, click on Next. We want to install a role and on this server, and then you would check off DNS Server here. When you did click on Next from this point, you might be you will be prompted to select some management tools so you can manage that DNS server and configure it after you're done installing the role. I'll click Cancel because we've already done that. If you want to launch the console, you can click on Tools and then DNS. I've got a shortcut on the bottom here. When you open up the management console, it's probably going to load the DNS server into the console, but if it isn't there, it's pretty easy to add. You just right click and connect to DNS server, and I'm going to pick this computer. You can, if DNS is installed on another role, on another server, you can just type it in here, dc2-can. I'm going to uncheck this box because I know the VM is turned off right now. So that's fine. If I tried to expand it, it just wouldn't load anything. It would time out. Okay, so the main basic features for DNS is forward and reverse lookups. So let's just explain what that is. So DNS is a service that will convert a host name to an IP address, or if you reverse that, it would convert an IP address to a DNS name, or to a domain name. So let's try that out. Ping dc1.lab. So what that's going to do is send out first it'll ask DNS, do you have a record for dc1-lab? And in the background, it's going to append lab.local. How do I know that it's going to append that? If I do an ipconfig, this connection-specific DNS suffix. So that's what it's going to append to your DNS searches as your first DNS lookup. You can have many in this list if you have other domains or things that you want to search. You can add to there and set the priority of which one to search first and stuff. So let's just try it out. Ping dc1.lab. So DNS is going to answer, yes, I know this host name has an IP address, and it is, oops, if I can spell properly, it is .can. So it resolves to this 192.168.10.2. Now, why does it do that? well, sorry, it does resolve to that IP address, and then the pinging process can start. So if we look in the DNS console here, I'll expand forward lookups, and again we're looking in lab.local because that's the suffix that it searched first. And then here we can see DC1-can. It does have an IP address registered, or a host record with that IP address. Similarly, we could ping any of these two. And if you had 1,000 computers using registering their host name and IP, then you would have 1,000 records in here. So I can do lab PC 123. If I can do that, then it would, well, it's not actually asking for asking DNS because it's itself, so it didn't do a DNS lookup. It's just returning the IPv6 local loopback adapter, which I'm going to turn off because I don't use that in my environment. And oh, it's turned off. I'll have to figure out why it returned that IP. Yeah, interesting. What else? Okay, so the opposite of that is to use DNS to find a host name if you know an IP address. So if you do ping-a, that's going to do the reverse. It's going to look up the host name using this IP address. And it can do that because we have a reverse lookup zone set up already. So if you expand this, and here we can see that the reverse lookup zone has been added, and there are records in there already. So this here converted the 10.2 address to this host name. So that's great. If you didn't have a reverse lookup zone for that subnet that you're trying to do reverse lookups for, it's quite easy to add. You probably want to be very careful in a production environment just to delete your zone. You'll probably want to take it back up first, but because this is a test lab, and I don't mind recreating it. So I'm going to create a new zone, click on next, a primary zone, and we want this information stored in Active Directory. So all of the DCs will learn that information. And here I want all of the DCs to learn about this reverse lookup zone and all of the records that have been added to it. So I'm selecting the middle one. Right now I don't have a forest, so there's no subdomains and stuff like that, so I'm not going to select the top one. And by default you would want this selected anyways to minimize traffic across your WAN or LAN. And it's going to be IPv4 as I mentioned. Now here is where you want to type in your subnet, the first 3 octets of your subnet. And you don't type in the last one because it knows. And we're only going to allow secure dynamic updates. And click on finish. So that's how that zone got there. And now if I were to release and renew my IP address, or another way to do it is just to disable and enable it, that'll get a new IP. It should... Okay, it's got an IP, so let's refresh this. And here's our pointer record. So that's great. Now for this DC, I can do this as well, register DNS. That's another manual way to, oops. Actually, register DNS. Will this create a, we'll see if this creates a register DNS, a reverse lookup record. Because it already has a forward, or it already has its IP registered. I just want to create this reverse lookup record. Refresh. No, it didn't do that. So we might have to wait a little bit, or we might have to create a record in here manually. And actually, let's do that right now. I'm going to create I'm curious if it'll create itself. So I'm not going to create a reverse lookup record for this DC. Hostname, which is DC1. And its IP is .2. So I'm going to create a record for .3, which is DC2-can, which is that IP address there. So if we come into our DNS manager, reverse lookup zone, I'm going to create a new pointer record. And the host IP address is .3. And the host name, I could type it in manually, or I can search the forward lookup records in DNS for this address. And here I can see DC2, so I'm going to select that one. So now what it's doing is converting this, or it's storing this record and converting it to that host name when people yeah. So now if I do a ping a 192.10.3, it should resolve that. And it's not going to ping because it's offline right now, but we do see that DNS did do the reverse lookup properly. Now there is one more feature in here. Well, DNS can do lots and lots more stuff. There's an advanced item here. And if so any DNS request that gets put through this machine, or if I were to ping something that the server doesn't know about, it's going to cache that record so it doesn't have to go outside to the world and query other DNS servers. So what it does is it stores that information in this folder here. Just going to refresh. So here we can see that it has tried to contact root servers, but because I don't have any public access, it's not actually contacting anything or storing anything in this cached lookup. Now, if you did have a need to clear the cache, so you don't have to wait for that DNS record to be refreshed, you can right-click and clear it, as I had done earlier, or you can come in here and the command is flush DNS. Those will do the exact same things. So if I right-click and refresh this now, well, there's nothing in there to clear, but those are the exact same things. Okay. And one other thing, I won't go into too much as well, but another tool to do DNS related tasks is a tool called NSLOOKUP. And so here we can see the default server is localhost. If you wanted to use a different DNS server for your queries, oops, sorry, I resized it and it screwed up the display. Let's see, NSLOOKUP. So if I wanted to use a different server, I could type in server 8.8.8 and use Google's lookup, or I could use my own DC2-can. This is offline, so it's not going to work. So what I'll do instead is I'll say use itself for the DNS queries. And you can do things like set type equals A. So now I'm looking for A records, and if I type in A records for lab PC1, you can see that it resolves to this IP address. If you were to type in just an IP address, that's doing a reverse lookup, so it should convert that to your lab PC, your DNS name as well. If you wanted to look for mail records, you do a set type equals MX, and then type in your domain name, gmail.com, and press enter, and it would give you a list of MX records for Google. Yeah, so quick and dirty. There's some quick and easy troubleshooting steps there. So hope it helped anyways, and we'll get on to our next demonstration here.